I really don't think that there's been such just almost unhidden. They don't even see a problem with what they're doing. Unhidden coordination to attack an administration or sitting president, and I think that's disgusting.
My name is Matt Orchard, and welcome to 50-50 Bias Both Ways. This is the podcast where I talk to the most controversial people that I can find and then deliver two incredibly lopsided interviews back to back. The first 15 is as cordial as I can make it, and the second 15 is as contentious as humanly possible. Alright, so, fun one today. The last couple of years, and especially since the election of Donald Trump, I think the political spectrum has really significantly altered. Left-wing and right-wing just don't quite mean what they used to, and there are all kinds of weird little subcultures springing up which I don't think really fit perfectly into any traditional description. My guest today is someone who I thought would be as good a spokesman as any for what we'll call the new right, a movement that's difficult to define in ways that will apply to everyone under its umbrella, but is generally characterized by a combination of civic nationalism, politically incorrect humor, often in the form of online memes, a rejection of some of the more prudish aspects of traditional conservatism, and most importantly, an enthusiastic support for America's 45th president. All of these are qualities that Lucian has in spades, and this was a funny one too, because when I initially walked out of the studio after recording it, I thought, God, I was a bit weak there. I could have bought a much better fight in the second half. And then after actually listening to it, I thought, nah, actually that was good enough. And I think it just speaks to how fundamental so many disagreements over Trump are. I mean, you can fight over any given policy or what have you for only so long until the opponent is essentially saying, I think this is terrible, and the supporter is saying, I think this is great. And where are you really supposed to go from there? So we might have hit a brick wall by the end, but I hope you'll agree that we hit that brick wall in an entertaining manner. Either way, let me know what you think on the Facebook page, Facebook/5050 Matt Orchard, or the subreddit r/5050 podcast, or the website, the 5050podcast.blogspot.com. That's 50 with numbers, not letters, in all instances. You can rate and review on iTunes to help push it up the charts, and keep up to date by following me on Twitter @RealMattOrchard. And for God's sake, if you like what you hear and you want more seasons in the future, tell your friends about it and share it on social media. Lucian Wintrich is the inaugural White House Correspondent for the right-wing website Gateway Pundit, and has historically had a penchant for photographing gay, boyish-looking shirtless men wearing Make America Great Again hats. But I will let him explain all that in more detail. Without further ado, Lucian Wintrich. I am joined by Gateway Pundit, White House Correspondent, Lucian Wintrich. Lucian, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Well, welcome. So, Lucian, just to start off with, you've definitely got an interesting origin story. So can you just give us the sort of brief rundown of your background and how you went from sort of, I guess, I don't know if you like this description or not, but a cosmopolitan sort of creative and artist to a White House correspondent, and how that transition took place in such a short period of time?
Well, yeah, certainly. So back in New York, I moved there to work at one of the top advertising firms in not just New York, but actually in the world, with accounts ranging from Budweiser to Hershey Chocolate to Coca-Cola. And I, in my spare time, it was around the time of the 2016 elections, I was political in my spare time. I would conduct some interviews. I'd write a couple op-eds for various publications. One of my friends ran a conservative publication at the time, and it was very much an aside, though, to most of my actual my career in advertising. And then I also sort of moonlit as a club promoter and party promoter and photographer. So I sort of pulled a bunch of that stuff together. I had concept for a series of photos of I'm a gay guy. I had a concept for a series of photos of gay guys in Trump hats to sort of poke fun at some of the narratives on the left that you can't be gay and conservative, or you can't even live in New York and be conservative, according to some people.
Something like 20%, right, of the population, something like that.
And the at first the company I was working for, they said they were fine with it. It's great. Just don't mention that you work here for these other things, these other projects you're engaged in. And then all of a sudden, a week before I was up for a major promotion, they pulled my manager, or whatever you'd call him, my supervisor, pulled me into his office. I thought he was going. HR was sitting there. I thought that was going to be the big day, that he would say, "You have here's the promotion. Here's your new paycheck." But instead, he said, "We need to sever ties immediately, and that maybe they'll hire me in the near future." I asked when. He said, "Oh well, maybe in December," which is obviously after the elections.
Yeah.
From there, I was pretty shocked and appalled that a company that I was really I excelled as an employee at, I made them a ton of money, that they would throw me under the bus like that.
Yeah, fair enough. I can imagine.
Very, very fortunately, I had all of a sudden had a ton of time on my hands, and only a couple months on the with my savings account at the time. So I threw the first ever, what's considered to be the only pro-Trump art show, and what actually is the first ever all-conservative participant art show ever in the world.
Yeah. And
I've looked this up. People try to downplay it as, it was just the first pro-Trump art show. No. It was the first conservative art show. And that was a smashing success. Wonderfully attended, incredible artists. Say it again.
And caused a fair amount of chaos at the time as well, I think, from memory.
Oh, we were kicked out of multiple different art studio spaces and galleries. One studio that agreed to it, and I signed a lease, they bailed at the last minute because half of their other artists said that if they would allow our show to go on there, that no other artist in New York, no other prominent artist would ever exhibit with them again. So they actually broke their lease, but we were able to finally find a gallery space that actually worked for the show. And shortly after that, I think it got around that I was a relatively ambitious young conservative, recently fired, and for the most part, other conservatives tend to look out for their own. And I had already met Jim Hoft, my current boss, at a party we hosted over the summer, the Wake Up Gays for Trump party, which was a lot of fun. And he said, how do you feel about starting as a White House correspondent once Trump takes over? I said, absolutely. Neither of us were even sure this would pan out, that this would happen. But Hope Hicks and Bannon, they greenlit us, and we were able to get in.
Yeah, well, I mean, as I said, it's a pretty remarkable story. So, no matter what you think of Trump, it's definitely interesting to listen to. And I got to say, so I mean, I mentioned to you during our correspondence that while I'm not a Trump supporter, and we'll get to that in a bit, I do definitely see the appeal in certain parts of the movement. And one of the things I just wanted to bring up that I really admire, because I know you're all about the media, one of the things I really admire about the sort of new right movement is their ability at branding. So my favorite example of this was like just after the election, I was watching, John Oliver and CNN and New York Times and so forth. They were all talking about this threat of fake news and how it was, fake news that was to blame for the results, and how, everyone had to be really vigilant about this. And I got to sort of watch in real time as the sort of Reddit and 4chan crowd sort of went to each other, okay, guys, this is obviously their new talking point, let's co-opt it. And they just relentlessly branded, like, every misstep, every, misleading headline, every biased piece of reporting, fake news, fake news, fake news. And in no time, you got, President Trump at that presser, I think it was the CNN reporters, yelling, "You fake news!" And it just went from a mainstream media talking point to this annoying thing that Trump supporters say, like literally over the course of a couple of weeks. And it was totally deliberate. I mean, they stole the term. It was beautiful. I mean, as I said, I respect the strategy, right? So I guess my question is, as far as I can tell, this sort of like online guerrilla warfare is a totally new phenomenon. So where do you think that comes from, and why is it pretty much everyone in that sort of camp a part of Trump's team?
Well, for many of us, required reading is Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, and you have to take the tactics of the left and how they're trying to keep us down and how they're trying to steer thought, and use those same tactics against them. I think a lot of what we do is sort of almost guerrilla warfare, and we are sort of rushing the leftist media from the forest rather than just going down the battlefield in formation, which is very disorienting to them, obviously, because they're used to these very traditionalist structures. And that has afforded us, I think, a tremendous amount of success and placed us where we are today. I personally in school I studied military strategy, diplomacy, and propaganda. Yep. And what the left is doing, especially leftist media, New York Times, CNN, ABC, they're putting out a very specific type of propaganda continuously, and they've been in charge, I think, of narrating the discussion and steering the discussion for so long that, again, they're completely disoriented, and they're further than just that. Most of us have at least some semblance of a sense of humor, and we're not really too scared to occasionally seem unprofessional.
Humor's I was going to say humor's a big part of it because, and I was watching an interview with Milo Yiannopoulos in Australia he was doing recently where he said, the left have been doing this forever, well now the right are starting to do it, get used to it. But with the exception of, the only big notable exception I can think of say South Park, it really has, in my mind, been a recent development where the right has actually started to be funny, intentionally. Gavin McInnes as well as an example.
Yeah. I mean, Gavin's hilarious. He's a good friend of mine. Milo was a friend of mine for a while, but we've had a recent falling out. But yeah, absolutely. Humor is a large part of it. I don't necessarily think that it's an issue of conservatives are starting to be funny. I think most of them were always funny, but the ones in media were too scared to actually implement any of their conservative beliefs in their work for fear of reprisal. The one guy, what's his name, who did the airplane movies?
Zucker?
It's Zucker. I don't know. Whatever that guy's name is, he is... He's a big-time conservative, but his first conservative movie, which was An American Carol, I believe, came out 8 years ago, I want to guess. Hilarious movie, tanked at the box office because it dealt with conservative ideology, and the far-left publications refused to give it a good review. Nobody ended up going out to actually see it. And that was because we were operating under this very toxic liberal media climate. And now that we're able to break in, conservative media and conservative humor is also breaking through.
Right.
Because people are able to actually see it and judge for themselves what's funny and what's not funny. And for the most part, I think we're far funnier than the left because we don't have the same barriers that the left has. We don't have the same sort of policing of thought or speech.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, as I said, a very interesting cultural development. I'm enjoying watching it. There's the other thing I just want to talk about in terms of media bias is, so I mean, generally speaking, the mainstream media in the US has always tilted leftward, I mean, at least in modern times. I'm not a media historian, but in modern times, certainly. But they do hate Trump with a particular passion. So what do you think is the most unfair thing or the thing that gets most under your skin personally that's often said about Trump?
Hard one. The most unfair thing. I think the general demeanor of the media towards this administration gets under my skin every day. Every time I'm at one of these press briefings, it's wild to me to see these other correspondents work together to come up with the most salacious thing they can accuse the administration of, pass that around to each other in Slack messages and text messages, and then try to attack the administration. I really don't think that there's been such just almost unhidden. They don't even see a problem with what they're doing. Unhidden coordination to attack an administration or sitting president, and I think that's disgusting. I think that to have the media, to have half the media in this country, the leftist media, work against the administration of a country that could only result in the a country not succeeding. They're working against the success of the country when they're working against the president and the administration.
Right, so I mean, it's not even the attempt at being impartial or being objective is sort of the main thing.
Yeah,
and obviously
I'm sure you've seen the briefings or Jim Acosta's reporting, right?
Yeah, I mean, and I agree with you too. I mean, a lot of it, they're not even questions. It's sort of, this is an opportunity for me to give a speech kind of thing. Talking about the Statue of Liberty.
People have come here from Australia, Germany, England, almost all foreign press that I'm friends with or that I've talked to. Primarily, most of them are liberal. The vast majority of them are liberal. Mm-hmm. They all still say that they've never seen. They say, there is still a leftist bias in my country, but I've never seen anything like I've seen in the U.S.
Yeah, I don't remember who said this, but someone was saying they actually wish it would go back to the time where no news publication pretended to be impartial. It was just, this is the Republican Gazette and this is the Democrat Post, because at least it would sort of be, there wouldn't be that pretension of objectivity. It would just be up front, this is who we are and this is what you're getting kind of thing.
I mean, I think so people accuse Gateway Pundit, the publication that I write for, of being right wing. Absolutely we are. We quite honestly, we wear it on our sleeve, which again, as you said, I think is far better and less disingenuous than what a lot of these major networks and organizations such as the Times are doing. Yeah.
And quickly, we'll go a little bit over time for the first section, but just one thing I wanted to ask before we move on. So you're obviously a conservative and a big fan of Trump. So there were more classically conservative options, I guess you could say, in the primary, like Ted Cruz, for instance, would be an example. So what drew you to Trump specifically? Just give me the quick pitch, and then we'll go to the next bit.
That's a great question. Well, he was. I felt an incredible need for this country to have a political outsider and a new lineup within the administration, within the government itself. And Trump could provide that. I didn't like Cruz. I wasn't wild about Rubio. I liked Rand Paul for a while, but his demeanor, I think, was lacking. And people criticize Trump's demeanor. Everything from when Trump started laying out policy, I was relatively undecided, I think, until June. When Trump actually started laying out policy, while simultaneously criticizing the establishment of the party that he was running in, which is a pretty odd thing, right? Because if you're running for president, you want to pull in the higher ups there. He did the exact opposite. Yep. That compiled and compounded with his more, I think, crass way of occasionally speaking and his nicknames for people, and it was very, I think, wonderful and performative. I think that resonated with a lot of other Americans. Yeah, it's still going on. It's wonderful. We have a president who is calling out the fake news.
Okay, well, that'll transition nicely to the second half. So I'll just lay my cards on the table here for you, Lucian. So if I was an American in a swing state on election day, I would have voted for Hillary Clinton. And it would have been a begrudging vote, but not one that I would really have to hesitate about. And I think the reason above all else for that is I could not justify putting such an obnoxious reactionary moron in a position of being the one to negotiate with countries like Iran and North Korea. So now you're not just an anti-Hillary guy, but positively pro-Trump. And could you explain why you don't see an issue with his temperamental issues that you were sort of alluding to there when you consider the amount of power he has, and why you don't lose any sleep at night over the prospect of a nuclear apocalypse?
Well, first of all, it is very funny. I like that there was a humorously biased question for a journalist. It's very cute that you're sort of learning the ins and outs of biased reporting.
I'm not trying to be impartial. I mean, that's the whole point of the show, is very soft one side, very combative the next side. So up front.
Well, first of all, we do have a check and balance system in America. So this notion that, oh my God, his fingers on the nuclear button and the entire world could blow up. It's just so silly. It's so asinine, and it's based on, I think, a lack of understanding about how our government works here. The second thing about his temperament, I think his temperament's wonderful. You could either, as Hillary did through her rotten teeth, call half the country deplorables, or you could, I'm a victim. Hillary still is calling herself a victim with her book, What Happened. Would you want a weak person?
I didn't say I'm a fan of Hillary Clinton, though. So, I mean, I take that on board, but try and keep it on Trump as much as possible.
So, yeah, if comparing the demeanors of the two, I infinitely prefer Trump's demeanor. We've had under the Obama administration, leaders from around the world were able to sort of walk all over us, quite honestly. During the Clinton administration, that is what led to the situation with North Korea that we have now. Trump's hardline approach, and even just being a little bit combative, saying if they try anything, they'll be met with fire and fury. Military experts and diplomatic experts said, you know what, this sort of worked, and nothing else we were trying, this pussyfooting around, wasn't working. What Trump's doing now is in fact working.
But
not only that, but it's getting Trump in office has gotten millions of Americans interested and into politics who otherwise were very impartial to it. We have younger Americans waking up and wanting to engaging with American history and modern policy. That's really important. And if there's one thing that Trump will actually have accomplished, because right now I am sort of upset with the stagnations on tax reform and healthcare. It will be waking up an entire generation to American history and American policy.
You were talking about that fire and fury comment and how people were saying, nothing else works. But the thing is, he made that fire and fury comment, and then North Korea has continued to do testing, and they haven't been met with fire and fury. So doesn't that sort of hurt the nuclear deterrence?
They were met with much tougher sanctions. China, for the first time,
it's not fire and fury.
Ages does appear to be working with us and trying to keep a cap on little North Korea. So, listen, you have to remember, during Obama's presidency, I don't have an exact number in front of me, but at least At least a couple times, 3-4 times a year, you'd read that, North Korea's testing a missile, North Korea's threatening the United States, and Obama really wouldn't say very much. He'd just say, "Okay, guys, please don't do that." I'll concede. What's the argument? You think that it's just as effective as other diplomatic strategies?
I'll concede it can go too far in the other direction as well. I mean, especially, forget Obama even for a second, like Madeleine Albright and the way she interacted with Kim Jong-il. So, I mean, it can go too far in the other direction as well. I'm just saying that even given the Madeleine Albright approach, I'd prefer that to the just blatant escalation of the situation. I mean, you're saying, this is the only thing that works, but I mean, that's all well and good saying up until the moment that Kim Jong-un gets antsy and actually fires something.
Well, do we want to escalate it? Here's the thing. Do we want to escalate it now while they're technology is 50 years past any other countries, or do we want to escalate it in the future when they might have an opportunity to catch up? The threat with North Korea is absolutely growing, and unless we cut it out now, while it's still somewhat in its infancy, then we could end up with a much, much bigger problem in the future. I mean, again, Bill Clinton during what was the sort of treaty back then called?
Bill Clinton essentially,
he negotiated. Do you remember that when Clinton negotiated with the North Koreans?
I imagine that was the era I was talking about because Madeleine Albright was his Secretary of State then. We're probably talking about the same time period, I assume?
Yes.
Yeah. So go on. Yep.
So what did Clinton do? Gave them $5 billion, and he said, "Hey, just please, here's some money. Just stop doing the nuclear thing." And very, very unfortunately, well, not even unfortunately, very understandably, they took that $5 billion and they said, "Hey, well, we have more money to develop now."
I mean, I'll give you that. That's a bad move. I still would imagine there's a middle ground between, as I said, escalating the situation and giving them $5 billion. But I'll put a pin in that for now because I want to move on to some other stuff. I mean, just in terms of similar thing to the temperamental issues, but not quite. Just general incompetence as opposed to anything specific. So, I mean, take the travel ban, for instance, and I won't even get into the actual principle of the travel ban, but just the way it was rolled out initially. So when it was initially rolled out, there weren't even green card exceptions, which just seems like an incredible oversight, and there was chaos as a result of that kind of thing. To me, that just showed how unprecedented the level of incompetence in this particular White House is. I mean, do you not feel embarrassed or less sure of your support when your guy handles these kinds of things so poorly?
No, I don't think he handled anything poorly. I think that with something like a travel ban from very dangerous countries, there's the only wrong way to
so there shouldn't
handle
be green card
that would have been not to implement it.
But so there shouldn't be green card exceptions?
Not until we fully work out our vetting system, which I believe Sarah Sanders or John Kelly the other day said that there will be some refugees allowed in from these countries. We've improved our vetting standards. I would see that to me that bothers me. I would love to actually read a report on how those standards were approved, rather than just having the administration blindly say, "Oh, we've improved upon them." So that bothers me more than how the initial travel ban was rolled out.
When I said green card exceptions, just to be really clear that we're on the same page, so I'm talking about someone who's been approved from one of these countries, has a green card, has been working. So, I mean, that's almost, that's sort of vetting in and of itself. They've gone, overseas on vacation or back home to visit their family or what have you. They're coming back. They're returning to basically their residence, and they're not allowed in. I mean, that is what the initial rollout entailed, and it was quickly reversed because it was
obviously there would have been a huge problem if because a lot of those people with green cards, again, many were not properly vetted, and still were able to gain entry. So yeah, are we going to would you have preferred the administration round up everybody with a green card and ship them back and say you're not welcome back in that way?
No, I would have preferred there was a green card exception, just like there was a green card exception after they solve the initial chaos from the botched rollout. I prefer the policy they ended up approving.
Say the last thing again. I
prefer the version of the order that they ended up approving, the one that's currently in place now. I mean, I'm not saying I'm even a fan of that, but I'm on at least the same page with that.
What's the trick with? Okay, do you ever go to a? I assume you've owned a used car, right, at some point or another in your life?
Yeah.
Or bought a used car?
Sure.
Okay. So would you go to the guy and say, if he wants $10,000 for it, you only want to pay $8,000? Would you say, I'll give you $8,000, or would you say, I want to pay $5,000?
Yeah, so I mean, this is the Dilbert Scott Adams sort of approach of the big first offer, right? You do something absolutely ridiculous first, and then you can get more of what you want later.
The bureaucracy and passing any sort of policy in Washington is an absolute nightmare, and so you always have to over ask, and then have it once it rolls back, you end up getting what you want.
So you implement a bill that's absolutely atrocious and leads to chaos and is an absolute clusterfuck and makes you look like you're totally out of it.
And that's what the right and the left does. I mean,
I don't remember any previous administration deliberately bungling the rollout of a policy like that on purpose. Well, deliberately on purpose. Sorry, it's a redundancy, but in order to get what they wanted through. That doesn't sound like a strategy that's going to do you much good in the long run. It makes you look incompetent. Do you think?
What about Obama's Affordable Care Act, which raised premiums? Oh, you can keep your insurance. You can keep your same premiums. You could see any doctor you want. And insurance for most Americans, just middle class Americans, right, who are, we'll say, making anywhere from $30,000 to $130,000 a year, they saw their premiums double. They had to switch doctors. Yeah.
Do you think that Obama's bungling of that policy was something he did on purpose so that he could get more of what he wanted in the future? Do you think?
Well, with that one, I think nobody got what they wanted, which just speaks to the far more effective negotiator we have in the Oval Office these days.
Okay. Well, just one other tidbit, actually, I wanted to bring up just in terms of the sort of personality of Donald Trump, because there's so many things that come out, and this was just one small thing. I don't think it would be a small thing if it was another president, but one small thing that was just a favorite of mine from months gone by. So this is from Reuters. National Security Council officials have strategically included Trump's name in briefings, quote, in as many paragraphs as we can because he keeps reading if he's mentioned, according to one source who relayed the conversation he had with NSC officials. So again, Lucian, any concern? I mean, would you like a president with just a touch less self-absorbed, maybe a bit longer of an attention span? Would that be a positive?
Oh, I think it's funny. We want somebody, by the way, in the White House who is who does care about their perception, I think. I know for a fact that Trump also reads a ton of conservative news. He's shared articles from our publication, the Gateway Pundit.
Okay.
His Trump Jr. has retweeted me before. I want somebody in the White House who is actually going to be reading what the base is saying and understanding what the people who elected him are hoping he actually accomplishes. So I think that's good. I mean, I hope he has a Google search alert up for his name.
I mean, the way I'm reading that is that they're including his name in briefings so that he doesn't lose place. He keeps paying attention because his name is coming up. It's not the news sources.
I mean, listen, as somebody who's read many of these briefings and policy papers, they are very, very dry. You gave me the brilliant idea.
I don't doubt you.
Before I read them, maybe I'll do a with a certain where I'll pick a word and do a find replace all in MS Word and have my name inserted. Might be a good way to make it a little more engaging.
I don't doubt you, Lucian, that they're very dry, but I think a skill that a leader of the free world should probably have is the ability to, stick through and bear through some sort of dry writing sometimes.
I mean, during many presidents, typically they do have. Well, it's funny because most of them start off the day by reading the paper. Trump does start off by watching Fox News, which also, it speaks to the modernity of our times today. But yeah, if you think that all former presidents read every single policy paper or wire that comes across their desk, I mean, obviously not. You'd be wildly mistaken, right?
I don't know if it has to be all the way.
I like that this president, apparently he's reading everything as long as his name's in it.
I don't think that's necessarily the inference I would draw from that. And again, I don't think it's fair to say that just because not every president reads every single bill from cover to cover, it's the same thing as needing your name laced through every briefing you receive to
But
get
see,
through
I mean,
it.
that's another one of those silly tangents, though. Like President Trump likes 2 scoops of ice cream. That's sort of in the same category. What we really have to look at is what policies he's actually passing, what he's actually doing for this country, what our current place in the world is. Not necessarily if he needs how much ice cream he likes, or if he likes seeing his name in various reports.
Well, we'll end on some common ground because I don't really care about his ice cream habits either, Lucian, so I'll give you that. Okay, that's it. Lucian, thanks again for your time, and one thing I always ask guests as well is how did you find the format?
I thought it was effective. I think it's a very common format to sort of start off with more softball-y, getting to know you type of questions, and then try to build into more confrontation. I mean, that's sort of how I run my periscopes. We just had an alt-right, somewhat of a white nationalist type of character on the show, and that's more or less how we conducted it.
Well,
yeah, I think it's a solid way to get some information out of people.
Okay, well, thank you for making me feel less special there, Lucian. But I'm glad that you enjoyed the experience, and thank you again for your time.
Thank you. Have a nice, is it evening there? Morning?
Morning, 9 a.m.
Okay, well, have a nice morning.
Have a good one.